Um, what do you see, not necessarily for Charlotte, but just in general, as you look at America, whether it's the federal government or state governments, what kinds of things can be done to help?
Well, I think we have a serious challenge because what's happened in the last 20 or 30 years, particularly the last 15 years, is that capital has become very mobile. Money moves freely around the world. And therefore, money is able to bargain for the most attractive terms. So as it says, I'll go here if you give me this, and it goes to somebody else and says, what will you give me? If they get a better deal there, the money moves. And it moves across borders, too. Labor still is very much stuck. It does not move. Cannot go to the places where there's huge demand for labor. We can't all move to China and take up jobs in China. A few do. I mean, every year I see in China more Americans and Europeans who've decided to live there because they found interesting career prospects. So the fact is we live in a world now where capital is very mobile, is able to negotiate the best possible terms. Labor is not. The conclusion is it's the responsibility of governments to make sure that the places where people are competitive. And that's because otherwise there's no way these people are going to enjoy higher standards of living. And so the burden is on the federal government and the state government to make their locations globally competitive. And that is what, at the end of the day, is going to attract the capital to those locations. And there is an element of a zero-sum game in this. Mm-hmm. So when a company shifts its headquarters from one part of the US to another part of the US, somebody gains, but somebody is losing. So that's really not the long-term answer to how do you create competitiveness. So whatever you might do in Charlotte, you're still a part of the state, and the state is a part of a country. And some of the policies at the country level have an impact, filters all the way down to a particular state or a particular location. So I think we have some real issues at the federal level to make the US a more competitive location. And that means the whole question of deficits, the question of the entitlement programs, the propensity for high consumption and less investment, propensity to spend money on the elderly generation but not have enough money to invest on the next generation. These are all fundamental issues that we have to deal with, I think, to improve our competitiveness. And investing in human capital and education is a very important piece of that, I think, is the way to stay ahead. Now, I think the US is still a very competitive location. I know John will agree with me that even though we may not be as collaborative in our innovation as we should be, the rest of the world envies us for how innovative we are. The problem is, 50 years ago, if you had a Steve Jobs who was innovative and produced the iPhone, you would have 10,000 jobs or 100,000 jobs created in the US to make the iPhone. Today you have a Steve Jobs invents the iPhone, the 100,000 jobs are created elsewhere. So our challenge now in today's world is, it's not enough to have the brilliant people who are the 1% or the half of 1% or the tenth of 1% who could employ all of the rest of us. But in today's world, the work gets dispersed globally from day one. It doesn't take 50 years to disperse globally as it used to. That means everybody else has also got to have first world skills to earn a first world wage. You cannot say, I'm lucky to be born in a first world country, my skills are really not first world, but I happen to be in the first world, so I'll enjoy a first world standard of living. That was the old days. And so the investment in education to get everybody up to the point where they're productive enough and can do the kind of work that could only be done in the US, that has to change. And I think that's, again, a fundamental challenge ahead of us.
I'm curious, since he mentioned the example of Steve Jobs and the iPhone, and of course they're made in China, and we've heard all kinds of wonderful things about how they're made.
In China.
So, right. So, yeah. I wanted to ask, though, there is also, you hear this talk of, can manufacturing come back to the U.S., in a meaningful way? I'd like to hear both of you just kind of weigh in on that idea.
Well, I'll pick up on Ravi's point and then emphasize we don't appreciate it. Capital is mobile. And I think North Carolina doesn't, from an economics point of view, doesn't actually recall the fact that capital in terms of textiles did move from New England to the Carolinas. And so we benefited by that capital mobility, and labor is a lot less mobile, so that's why you have some longer term unemployment problems in places like Massachusetts and Rhode Island and Connecticut because of that. And I think that in the comment you made to me and the notes you sent me, you talked about NAFTA, and I think NAFTA was another great example where capital was quite mobile in North America, but labor far less mobile over time. And I think, let's go back again to my point earlier in terms of dealing with the Chamber of Commerce and maybe Duke Energy. I mean, I think there's an area for collaboration between Duke, the Chamber, and seeing what the people in Abu Dhabi and Dubai do about energy. Because it isn't all oil. Oil is a source of revenue for them. But okay, now you got the money, what are you going to do in terms of heating and cooling and transportation costs and all these other things that use this energy? And I think there might be some elements of collaboration there. So it doesn't take 20 people going to Abu Dhabi or Dubai. Again, pick up somebody from Northeastern, pick up somebody from CPCC and the engineering schools and say, let's drag their butt over there and let's see what let's learn from their university experience, and maybe they can share some university experience here. And I would also say another thing too, when asked, they told us that 90% of their students are domestic, because again, if you go to the university, if you go to the engineering school in Abu Dhabi, there's no tuition. It's a question of just qualify. If you can qualify, you're in. But the other 10% are all foreigners. I don't know what percentage of that is Americans, but again, could there be some collaborative effort between, let's say, a Northeastern program for a semester or a CPC, an engineering program at UNCC, or CPCC send somebody over there for 6 months and do something? That could be also kind of interesting as well. And maybe even Johnson & Wales. I mean, they have some amazing restaurants over there. The other thing that was fascinating when I was over there, in the restaurants and in all the service areas, my wife and I did go to McDonald's. The Quarter Pounder tastes the same, so there's no difference. But in all the restaurants, all the servers were foreign, every single one of them. Really? Everyone. I never saw anyone that looked halfway even native. That we had people serving us from New Zealand and all over the world. Serving there. But anyway, Robbie, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, I think manufacturing is coming back at the margin, from what I can make of it, but it's not going to be the old manufacturing that's coming back. Mm-hmm. It's going to have to be a new kind of manufacturing, which is still very skill intensive. So people point to 3D printing and say, look, now manufacturing is coming back. Right. But 3D printing is not assembly line work of the kind that went away. So what's coming back is not what went away. What's coming back is a new kind of manufacturing. So it goes back to my same point, that you still need the people with the right skills to engage in that kind of manufacturing. The old jobs with relatively semi-skilled or low-skilled work, I think will have a hard time coming back, because it's, again, at the margin, a few things are working in the U.S. favor. I think one is the cost of energy, which has gone down, and the supply of natural gas and so on, again, will allow certain kinds of manufacturing to come back. But it's not going to be the answer, I don't think,
yeah,
to the
I think
unemployment.
it's the advanced manufacturing that's coming back. But again, that's why we have engineering schools, to come up with that advanced manufacturing processes. And that's why we have GE aircraft engines being assembled and put together, at least the parts, in a state like North Carolina. Right. So we can do that kind of stuff. That's why we have a Siemens. And so I think Robbie's point, and I'll reemphasize it, and many of you have seen some of the stuff I've written, yeah, those old jobs are not coming back. And I hear somebody say, well, Caterpillar's bringing a production facility back to the United States. Yeah, they're bringing the production back, but the jobs aren't coming back, right. Pal. There's a big difference between manufacturing production and manufacturing employment. And so once again, you call upon schools like CPCC to improve the talents of the welders and the machinists so they can get into those processes. But the legacy of North Carolina, I think, for a long time, when the U.S. was a closed economy in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and maybe some of you are more native than I will remember this. I mean, it was easy for a kid to drop out of high school and go work in Kannapolis or go work in Gastonia. But you can't drop out of high school or even finish high school and not study and then go get a job today. It's not the same deal. And I think culturally and in terms of our attitudes, that is one of the great transitions North Carolina has to make, is that we can't depend upon kids just dropping out and going to, you know, Pillow Text to go to get a job, because those jobs don't exist anymore.
And they're not coming back. I could go on and on, but let's let y'all ask some questions of our panelists. Anybody? There you go, in the back.
Yeah, you had said that Siemens and GE and those kinds of companies are providing free labs and things in Dubai. Why are they not providing them here?
Good question. I mean, you know, I don't know. That's an excellent question. Why aren't they doing it here? I guess they see a greater, for me as if a company, I'm thinking I just see a greater opportunity there. A greater opportunity to be in the ball game, play the game, get into that stuff. So, you know, I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking, okay, I'm Duke Energy, all right? I'm an energy company. They're interested in, they have all these people doing all kinds of strange stuff over there. Maybe if I'm Duke Energy, I'll send somebody on a trip over there, talk to the guy who runs the school and says, how can we help you? How can we, you know, get into your ball game and maybe pull some of your people from your place over here and put them in a very different culture, but hey, you know, study and see what, you know, see what goes on. So, you know, I don't know. It's an interesting question. I mean, you got a whole lab set up by Cisco. I mean, you know, okay. You know, I mean, like, okay, I got it. It's another challenge I think sometimes we have is, you know, we're so parochial in what we do. We're so afraid. I mean, you know, suppose you had a university that was said, okay, we're going to have iPads. And the producer of something like an iPad, but it's not an iPad, is going to complain. Oh, why did you do that? You know, it's unfair in competition. And sometimes I think we get so parochial that, you know, we don't really pay attention to that, and I think that's quite different. So I don't know. Good question.
Can I just jump in and throw in a guess? I mean, governments are very important in these countries. They control a lot of things that go on within the economy. They control a lot of money. They control some of the largest enterprises. Usually the energy-related enterprises in the region belong to the state, and they are the largest source of revenue for the budget and so on. So if you want to build relationships with the government, you do things that makes the government happy. And the government says, we're going to set up the university, and all these guys rush to say, okay, I'll give you this, I'll give you this. They're collecting back through contracts they're going to win for something or the other. That'll more than pay for it, because you get very high, hefty profit margins in contracts in the Middle East compared to the US. And so they're going to recover that. So I think it's just a return on investment issue.
Oh, I'm from Louisiana. I understand that. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Jumping on what you just said, and a question for both of you, of course, is what is government's role with private industry in order to create this type of innovation that you're speaking about, revolutionary innovation, evolutionary innovation? Seems like the big conundrum in this country is just how big should government be, and where does government get involved, and where does industry take over?
Yeah, this is an ideological issue, and I think we're going to get it.
You know, I'll go back, and I've read a couple of things about this recently. The suggestion is that we do, as you would suspect, the Abraham Lincoln story. Lincoln said, build me a damn railroad, okay? I'm not going to tell you about the track. I'm not going to tell you how to do this. I'm not going to tell you how to do that. You go build a damn railroad. And private industry went and did it. And they didn't have all the EPA regulations, all the OSHA regulations. They didn't have government dictating this or dictating that. For some of you probably, again, remember World War I and the armor plate that had to go on ships. And the federal government decided that they were going to dictate how you're going to build this armor plate, and they're going to set up their own plant. Totally failed. Meanwhile, the private sector was told, put some armor plate on these darn ships so they don't sink because of the U-boats in Germany, and the private sector did that, and the boats didn't sink. So again, I think there is a point where the government has to identify something, throw in some seed money, but not tell people how to do it. And many of us who manage people know that one of the best things we can do is give somebody an assignment, tell them you need to do this, but don't tell them how to do it. And unfortunately, I think in our government, we sort of really get in the way and start dictating to people how much of this and how much of that and who you need to hire, what contract. I mean, that was, again, in my experience, but some of your experience, the big dig in Massachusetts. I mean, all the stupid government regulations about the tunnels and the bridges and the landscaping and everything else. Well, yeah, okay, you got it, but it was, 6 times, 7 times over cost and 10 years late. So I think a lot of it, to me, the government needs, in some instances, can figure out we need to do something and then let the private sector go to do it within some guidelines. But stop overseeing how it's done.
Ravi?
Well, I think the government's fundamental role is to make the location as competitive globally as possible. That's sort of conceptually the way I think of it. See, the role of companies is to, multinational companies, is to string together different locations around the world for different things so that the company is as globally competitive as possible. They don't really care about individual locations. They go to the location for the activity, which on that location is the best place to do that little thing. They'll go and do it in Abu Dhabi if that's the right place. They'll go and do it in Singapore if that's the right place. The job of government is to make, if you're Singapore, is make sure Singapore is very attractive for various things so that various companies will want to invest there. And the same thing I think is true for the US. Governments have to make sure the infrastructure is good. Governments have to make sure there's skilled workforce and maybe some cases support for research. So they throw some money at certain issues and say, we won't tell you how to do it, but we'll encourage you to do it so that we become the place that's at the cutting edge in that particular industry. But I think what happens as countries develop, we develop what some people have called the no-risk syndrome. And that is, we want to protect citizens from all risks. That seems to be one of the characteristics of development. Once you get more prosperous, you think, oh, we shouldn't have to suffer with that. Oh, we shouldn't have to suffer with this. So we put lots of safety nets in lots of different areas. And after a while, you got so many nets all over the place, you can't move. So,
well, I'll re-emphasize that. I mean, I came back from Bhutan, okay? And you talk about no risk and everything. We were driving mountain roads to go doing some of our hiking. There were no guardrails, and some places there were no roads. I mean, you were in this Jeep and or Land Rover, and literally we were going down. It was totally dirt. It was gravel. We were going over rocks, and the cliff was like right there, and it was 4,000 feet. And I was going. My wife and I were on there, and we were saying there was no way you would allow cars to drive on this road in America. You would have guardrails. It would be paved, at least to some extent. And you wouldn't have these rocks just standing and sitting, literally sitting in the middle of the road. The rocks were there. It was like amazing. And then I was saying a couple of people, we hiked up the Tiger's Nest. And I don't know if you ever know what Tiger's Nest is, but if you ever saw the Batman movie with Liam Neeson and Christian Bale, right at the beginning that they're showing you this cliff where there's this big monastery, a Buddhist monastery on the top of the cliff. That's Tiger's Nest. Anyway, so my wife and I hiked up there, and I was telling a couple of people, we were hiked up there, and the path is like this, and there's no guardrail, there's no any of that crap, and you're walking up there, my wife and I, and it's 5, 6, well, it begins at 4,000 feet, but the sides are like 5, 6, 7, 8,000 feet, and you're saying, don't fall, don't slip, But again, I agree with you. We try to make everything so safe and the no-risk syndrome, you could never get away with that in a lot of these places.
I'll give you an example from the healthcare thing since I started with that. One of the procedures they do in India, which is quite rare in the US, it's called the beating heart surgery. That is when they do bypass surgery in the US, you stop the heart and you put the person on a heart-lung machine. You then operate on the muscle, and then you put them back, revive them, and the heart starts. In India, they do what 90% of the heart operations are done as a beating heart. The heart is still beating. That way you avoid the need for a heart-lung machine. You speed up the recovery because the patient's recovery is faster. And they also leave the hospital sooner, so its cost is lower. Now I asked the doctor, how come you do this? 90% of the cases you do beating heart. In the US, I'm told it's 10% of the cases that are beating heart. And she said something very profound. She said, you know, we take more risks here. But having taken the risk, because we do so much volume, after a while, the risk goes away. I thought that was very interesting. So that's something about the environment there, because there's nobody breathing down your neck saying, you can't do that. So they go ahead and do it. Now, a few people probably may have been sacrificed. I can't say that it wasn't the case. But having done it, they move up the learning curve, and now they can do it, so it's completely safe. And in fact, their record of safety is as good or better than the Mayo Clinic in the US. But they couldn't have done it if they didn't have the environment where you could take those risks.
We're going to take one more because Cheryl is very big on punctuality and I don't want to get in trouble, so we'll take one more question.
One of the biggest problems facing the United States is the cost of health care. Why isn't there more entrepreneurial activity like the doctor going to Grand Cayman? There have got to be other locations they could go to that are closer to the U.S. that would invite patients in to be treated at substantially less than what they can be treated here.
I think that revolution is coming. I see it coming. I mean, these guys, this particular hospital, is going to start with a 150-bed cardiac care hospital. But their plan is to go to 2,000 beds. But then they've got initial plot of about 5 acres, but they've got rights to 500 acres. I said, what's the rest of the land for? And I think back of their minds, they're thinking assisted living facilities, resorts. So you would go there for surgery, and then you would spend 2 weeks in the resort. And the insurance companies, they're saying, will pay for travel for 2 people, no co-payments. You can stay on for another week or 2 to recuperate, and you come back. And the insurance company makes money. Patients have a nicer experience.
Well, you know, it's interesting, John. I've heard that question, and I can't remember how people phrased it, but I guess you could probably go to somebody at Presbyterian, the Carolinas Medical Center, and ask them, okay, we do have innovation. We have the LASIK surgery, and we have the plastic surgery, and it's widely spread, we had amazing innovation in those areas. Now, why is it that we have innovation in those areas, but we don't seem to have innovation in other areas? Or why is it that, you know, LASIK surgery has become almost, again, like you said earlier, you know, production line for a lot of these doctors? And it's got to be something well, again, I'm an economist, in the demand side or the supply side. There's something in there that makes the dynamics of that business in healthcare so much more, quote, efficient and low cost than in other areas of healthcare. And I don't know what it is, but I bet you if you talk to somebody at Presbyterian or Carolinas, that they'll probably have a very good idea of why the economics are different.
Cheryl, I have struggled to get these men to talk, but I did my best. With that, let's thank our panelists. And Cheryl, it's all yours.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you both. I'm chuckling because I was thinking in the back, you know, I think sometimes the nemesis of innovation can be a litigious society, which I imagine is a little different here than you see in some other markets. But I think a couple of the points that you brought upon that I'll walk away with are to keep that spirit of innovation and our role not only in products, but in processes and in enhancements to innovation so that we keep moving forward. And then, John, you talked about global partnerships, I think significantly. And, you know, we as a city, I think are aspiring to be more global. I don't think we're quite there yet, but we certainly are aspiring to be. And we certainly here at the university, I feel very fortunate to be in an environment where we have students in 92 countries. Yeah. And sending the students abroad for 6 months at a time as part of their co-op experience, and you know, studying in Antarctica, global climate change, because that's really about the value of applying the lessons learned and then moving forward. So I have gifts to say thank you. These are globes that are engraved, and so they speak to our Local Leaders Global Impact Series, and we thank you for that. I would invite each of you to join us next month. We do these once a month. Our next one, we don't have a postcard today, my apologies. Save the date, April 24th. We will have a session on the ethics and the role of sports in our society, and we will be bringing in our athletic director, Peter Roby, who recently came out of what he calls witness protection in the NCAA selection process, where he was selecting teams to compete in the current tournament, and Fred Whitfield, who you know as the president and COO of the Charlotte Bobcats. So I hope you will join us for that event. Please join me in thanking both John and Ravi and Eric for moderating.